By this time next week, we will be officially in the Penn State wrestling season. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Greg Pickel, our expert reporter for Blue White Illustrated, is here to give you the one last off-season primer. Media Day will be by this time next week, and we are 10 days away from the start of the season. So, Greg, we've talked about it all year. We've previewed it. We've promoted it, and it is almost here. But there's still some great stuff to talk about today, including the future of the program and a number one recruit that everyone wants to know about. So give us the rundown. What's coming up on today's show?
Yeah, so we're going to start with a couple of recruiting updates. Probably the last show, I shouldn't say this because now it'll guarantee that the show next week will need an extra segment to talk recruiting, but probably one of the last shows of the year that is mostly recruiting focused, because obviously we are 10 days away, I guess it is, from the Penn State Drexel dual meet to open up the 2024-2025 NCAA and Big Ten title defenses for Penn State. We're 9 days from the NWCA All-Star Classic, which a number of Nittany Lions will be in. And again, that's an exhibition, but it does have a role in the seeding process later in the year. So it's obviously still very important. So we're going to get into that a lot more next week. This week, we're going to do recruiting. And then one final offseason look, T. Frank, at the big questions left for Penn State to answer, either at Media Day next week or in the early portion of the season. So exciting times. We got football rolling, basketball's rolling, and wrestling is about to get rolling. So Penn State fans certainly keep coming back to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel for all of this intel as we get into wrestling season. It's hard to believe it's here already, but it's here.
Yeah, you mentioned all of that stuff, and maybe rolling isn't the right thing. All of the balls are in the air, and I'm not a good juggler generally, but I do love the fact that we've got a great staff here to cover all of that, so we catch more than we drop in terms of the comprehensive coverage of Blue White Illustrated. But let's talk about wrestling, recruiting, and of course, Bo Bassett. That's the number one thing on people's minds from a recruiting perspective. So what's the latest there?
Yeah, so Bishop McCourt had 3 wrestlers all in the class of 2026 at Penn State last weekend. Of course, part of their visit was to see the Penn State-Ohio State football game at Beaver Stadium. They took a trip to the Penn State volleyball match on Saturday night. Friday night, rather. I'm assuming all these guys have probably been to Rec Hall for a wrestling match, but if not, they got to see something a little bit different, but obviously still the environment of the Rec Hall building during a sporting event there, so that was good. But look, I mean, I think it goes without saying that when you're talking about the 3 guys who were on campus from Bishop McCourt, the powerhouse wrestling program out of Johnstown, you had the nation's number 1. These rankings are according to MatScouts, Willie Saylor's site over at Rofkin. You have number 1, Bo Bassett. You have number 2, Jax Forrest. And you had number 20, Sam Herring, from his list of 2026 juniors, or big board, rather, all on campus. Bassett is the prize of this class. Jax Forrest is the prize of this class. Herring's going to make somebody very happy here in the future, whether it's Penn State or somebody else. So I think the big takeaway for me, T. Frank, is that when Bassett sends out his post-visit recap, so to speak, they're all, as you would imagine, it's the same thing when we talk to football recruits and basketball recruits, very glowing, very positive. One thing that caught my eye from the email he sends out with these updates, though, is that he first started talking about his Iowa official visit. He was out there, I think at the end of October, last weekend of October. And he said, Iowa definitely checks all of the boxes except for how far away it is. And I thought that was interesting, considering the schools he is still considering. There's a long list of them. Michigan, I'm not going to go through all 14 or whatever it is now, but Michigan's obviously one. Iowa's one. Oklahoma State is even further away, and that's one of them. Yeah. He's going to take an official visit to Virginia Tech, which is of course, a little bit closer to home. And there's some others that are possibly going to pop up as well. But I thought that was interesting, a little nugget in there to maybe his thought process of what he's thinking in terms of where he would want to go. But he said Penn State, and that bright up was great and checks the boxes as well. And he noted that, of course, these official visit trips don't make things any easier when it comes to a decision process for him, T. Frank, that is going to take some time to play out. Everyone, I think, would love to know where he is going to end up for obvious reasons. He's a generational talent, a program either changing or enhancing talent, depending on where he goes. But he has no interest in deciding anytime soon. This is going to go into the spring. Jax Forrest is not as open about his recruitment as Bo is, so there's just not really much to report there. I'm sure he had a good time. Go ahead, T. Frank.
Can I have one follow-up here about Bo Bassett and the way he's been doing this and being proactive with, sending these out and knocking one off at a time? And what does that tell you about him, I guess, as a prospect and as a recruit? Because that might be another, just generally, that might be another insight into how he works. Because as you just mentioned, Jax Forrest doesn't talk all that much at all. So is that a personality thing? Do you think you can derive anything from that? Or just generally, what are the other factors you've picked up, if there are any, in his decision-making process?
Yeah, I think one of the things Bo and his family realized from quite, an early age is that, you can market yourself as an athlete. He is not, his newsletter that he sends out is sponsored. He has clinics already and videos that he puts out, teaching tools, things like that. And so there's a lot of different ways he gets his name out there and has long gotten his name out there. This is not anything new now that he's taking visits to colleges, of course. But yeah, I think that, in the NIL era, I'm not saying NIL is an end-all be-all this recruitment. I don't get that sense reading what he writes on these weekly or bi-weekly updates, whoever they might be. But I do get the sense that, it will at least be a part of the decision just based on the fact that how well he has marketed himself already and how open he has been about and transparent about things and letting people peek behind the curtain, so to speak. All of that plays a role in an NIL era where you can find all sorts of different avenues to market yourself and get out there in the world and make money while you're also chasing your dream. For him, of course, being the best college and then international wrestler he can be once his prep days are over. So I just think it tells you a lot about again, it's been a very strong and solid recruitment. It's going to be a well-researched decision, and he's taking everybody along for the ride, which again, I think is just an indication of what kind of opportunities he'll have at the next level, both on and off the mat. And so I think that's part of the reason too he's not rushing this. He knows that he has plenty of time to make a decision, and how what the criteria is in terms of how they're ranked when it ultimately comes time to make a call, we don't know. But clearly, it's going to be a decision made with all the information possible, without question.
How does that personality? I haven't ever noticed, as much as Penn State wrestling probably tries to take the tactics and all the things and make that as hard to understand for the opponent as possible. I don't get the sense that they curtail guys' personalities. They let them speak and be themselves and kind of promote who they are as a person. So just generally, because you have such a good feel of the program's personality, how does this fit?
Yeah, again, I think it's interesting because we're seeing the evolution of college sports right in front of our eyes, and it starts with guys in the current program, of course, but more than anything, it starts with the guys that are going to be coming in next as we get into this new era of college sports, and it's just not just football; it's wrestling, it's basketball, it's everything else. And how does that change programs and the way their guys interact with the public and things like that? So it's interesting. I mean, if you look at the current Penn State wrestling team, obviously guys do interviews, they do things outside of the program structure, I guess you would call it, but it's certainly not as prevalent as what Bo has been and what some other high school guys have been and what some guys at other schools have been over the last couple of years. So it is an interesting dynamic. I'm curious, Penn State has so many fascinating personalities. Mitchell Messenbrink seemingly currently the lead one in terms of drawing attention on social media, other than, of course, Carter Starachi for obvious reasons. But just curious to see what new opportunities they have. Clay Steadman there now. We've talked about him before. His title's general manager, program alum, is big in the NIL space. So I'm curious what avenues these guys will go down if they're interested now that he's there and kind of the point guy for those opportunities. So pretty fascinating how this will all play out. But yeah, I think that, Bo, again, is a guy that brings personality, brings a following with him, and you can capitalize that. You can capitalize on that now at the college level. So, and at the biggest stage you could possibly find with Penn State wrestling. So I appreciate you entertaining my curiosities in those kind of like nuanced, nooks and crannies of the conversation. Who are the other guys we're talking about today? I know I derailed you from talking about Jax Forrest. So what was the rest of that thread of recruits to know about in the update? Yeah, so I think Jax is, again, a guy that does not do the interviews and things like that. Well, I guess Bo he doesn't do mostly interviews. He does his own media. But, Jax is not playing that sandbox, or at least if he does, it's not anywhere you can find it easily. So a little bit of a quieter recruitment, but a similar to Bo, a well-researched one, a well-traveled one. And when he's ready to decide, it's going to come from the same, I'm sure, decision-making tree that Bo and the rest of his teammates at McCourt does. They have a good program on and off the mat. Education, obviously, is important. important there. So I just think that where these guys end up going will certainly tell you a lot about the future of college wrestling and who are some, if they end up going as a package deal, do they not go as a package deal, so on and so forth. So, the eyes of the college wrestling recruiting world are on these two guys and others in this class of 2026. But certainly it all starts with those guys, and everyone's gunning to land them, and it'll be fascinating to watch their recruitments play out. And again, I cannot stress enough, T. Frank, that this is not, I don't think either one of them are looking to wrap things up anytime soon.
Gotcha. Another update that we got here on the rundown: Drashawn Ross puts Penn State in his top 4. What do you know about that, and what's the context around that conversation?
Yeah, extremely talented upperweight wrestler out of Iowa announced his top 4 this week. He's actually ranked as a 3-star linebacker by On3 on the football field. Suffered a shoulder injury before this season that kept him from, I think, the end of his international high school opportunities in terms of freestyle on the wrestling mat, and caused him to miss most, if not all, of the football season out there in Iowa. So his top group: Oklahoma State, Iowa State, and Penn State. He's number 3 on MatScouts junior big board at this point in time for the class of 2026. I would assume he ends up elsewhere. It just seems to me that if you look at Penn State's outlook for the future, Mirasola is the heavyweight of the future. It certainly appears. So I would think Ross probably ends up somewhere else. Time will tell, but Penn State being in the mix here is certainly interesting because it has yet to host him, as far as I can tell. He's made a lot of other visits. Penn State is not one of them. Trying to find out if he is getting to Penn State. Haven't been able to confirm that one way or the other yet. But yeah, I wanted to point it out because it wasn't going across social media this week, but feels at least at this moment in time, I'd be a bit surprised if Penn State wins that recruitment, but time will tell.
All right. Because you can't literally have all of them. It right. Turns out. So the last thing we got here is as we mentioned to start the show, we're just a few days away from the start of the season, and you have a really interesting question. What don't we know yet? What do we still have to figure out? So part of understanding and figuring those things out is first identifying the questions. So what do you got? What is on your mind as Media Day is right in the windshield and the start of the season is just beyond that?
Yeah, so we're recording this on November 7th. Media Day is set for the Monday following this, which is November 11th, I believe. I think it is. But, the obvious, there's 2 obvious questions. I think Cale Sanderson is going to field 3 right out of the gate, or at least they should be within the first 5 or 6 questions asked. First one is an update at 133, where we think it's going to be Braden Davis. Second one, let me extend my question list to 4. The second one's going to be the situation at 149 and 157. And then obviously 197. What is the Penn State plan of attack there? We've learned in years past from these, T. Frank, asking those lineup questions in November that generally speaking, you're not going to get a lot in the way of specifics. I think you might get it at 133. I think I feel pretty good. Shane Van Ness is going to go at 149, assuming he is ready to go out of the gate, and his participation at the moment in the NWCA All-Star Classic next weekend indicates as much as well. But what's the plan at 57? Kasak is the guy ranked there. Facundo is the guy listed on the roster there as well. Alex Facundo, after a redshirt season at 165, drops down to certify at 157. So what is the outlook short and long term there? And then obviously 197. If I had to guess, I would be willing to think Josh Barr is probably a little bit ahead of Lucas Cochran there, but we might be able to, get some insight on that this week. I still think either way, that's going to be a battle, T. Frank, that plays out throughout the course of the non-conference portion of the schedule, but time will tell. And then the last question, and it arguably is the biggest one, but I'm not sure it's going to be the first question asked, is Greg Kirkfleet, the Penn State heavyweight defending NCAA champ, was to compete in the NWCA All-Star Classic, is no longer doing so. Flo has not provided the reason why. Penn State has not said why. There are situations in previous years, and we've talked about this in other shows, where guys scratch for a number of different reasons, short-term issues, long-term issues, whatever. So that's going to come up because this will be the first time Cale Sanderson speaks with reporters in a group setting ahead of the season. So maybe the most important question, but it's one that I get the sense that this is not a big deal, and so it may not be the first one that comes up as it relates to trying to figure out lineup spots versus the short-term and short-term outlook for Greg Kirkfleet. But I do think that's something that's going to come up at some point on Monday. I'm curious to find out. To me, it may be the biggest question Cale Sanderson answers on Monday, but like I said, it may not be the first one that comes up.
All right. And we'll have coverage of all of that with Greg over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you giving us some time to talk wrestling as the days have gotten short enough and it's dark enough outside that it feels like it's wrestling season. Greg, any final thoughts? I know that I already asked you and we're doing the outro, but any final thoughts about what fans might be able to read from you coming up at bluewhiteillustrated.com?
Yeah, so we'll preview Media Day next week and kind of do the written version of what I just said here with maybe a couple additional odds and ends based on what we can find out over the next couple of days. We'll have full coverage of Media Day as Penn State kicks off the 2024-2025 season. We'll have a preview of the NWCA All-Star Classic. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to cover that while I'm in Purdue for the football game, or at Purdue in West Lafayette, Indiana for the football game, but we'll figure that out. And then, it'll be, I will not be able to go to the match against Drexel because I'll be flying back from Indiana, but look forward to that as well. So a lot of preview content coming up. If you go back through previous episodes here or go over to bluewhiteillustrated.com, click on the wrestling page. We have been doing starting lineup projections and things like that over the last couple of weeks. We have the full schedule there as well. So check it out, bluewhiteillustrated.com. T. Frank, it's wrestling season. I look forward to chatting with you weekly as we get into it.
Love it. We'll talk next week.